Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Quiet Palace Podcast, where great legends prevail and evil wanes to dust. Hopefully. Today I'm back to tackle something I've been avoiding for a while, OneDnD. I've been hesitant on the playtest material, but there had been some intriguing things I'd heard about that warranted a sift through for what I have right now. We'll talk about some of the new rules, origins, backgrounds, new spell descriptions, and new class mechanics, and my thoughts on the process so far. Regarding to new rules, I'll start with the D20 test. I like the idea of grouping all of these up into one key term. We're still going to be calling out if it's a saving throw or an attack roll obviously, but for abilities or features that might affect all of those, we have a group term. I don't like that any of these can critically fail. One thing I preferred from D&D 5e was for certain the fact that a 1 wasn't as devastating if all we're doing is picking a lock or pushing boxes aside. In 5e, let's say your DC is 5. You roll a 1. You have proficiency in this skill, and a +2 modifier in said skill's designated ability score. That's a 5, and you barely make it. It might not be that big a deal since inspiration might be more easily available, but depending on your take, it might not be a desirable ruling. As for critical successes, it's gonna make DMs a little more careful with what they let the players roll for, more so that we can't be too reckless. Literally moving a mountain, no matter how high the DC is for you, should not be a task you can accomplish with a nat 20. Perhaps that's a way of adding more care to what rolls come up. Personally, I felt like it was fine before, but from either perspective I can see how a simple no can suffice for a situation similar to the aforementioned. I'll take a moment to talk about exhaustion though. That's something I really like about OneDnD. Each level grants you a -1 to your D20 tests and your spell save DC until you reach level 11, at which point you outright die. It does not feel as punishing as 5e's exhaustion system seems to be. Both rulings have their merits, but this form of exhaustion is easier to track and remember quickly where it matters. It also buffs the Frenzy Barbarian in a way. That part is straight up awesome. Big seal of approval. I'm happy with the slow condition. There's not really much I have to say about it though. It doesn't affect your main action, which I hope is never meddled with. Invisibility is a clean description, giving you an edge in combat as well. That being said, there's a lot of small clarifications that have changed a little bit and have just been worded in a clear, concise, and as compact a fashion as I believe can be managed. For the most part. But I won't cover everything here today. There's a lot I do like about the layout of OneDnD, and a few things I don't, but the general rules I'll personally give an honorable head nod. I would bid some things change, but in those surveys we all have our opinion. I feel like we need to work with what we have in full before I can help out in the next survey, but when I do, I hope that things are as agreeable as possible. I'll mention weapon mastery traits quickly for the sake of the future. If you have mastery, or proficiency or what have you, with a weapon, you may use that trait attached to it on your attack. The cleave or the nick properties come into mind. Hitting more than one target with a cleave weapon is pretty solid, and the nick property on light weapons making an attack a little more fun, being able to get another hit off on the same turn. With that being said, we'll hop into origins. Humans are a similar flavor to D&D 5e's variant human. You get inspiration whenever you finish a long rest, though I believe you can only have one inspiration from this trait at one time. You also get one skill proficiency, any kind you want, and a feat of your choice, or skilled I guess. They give you that as a recommendation. All in all, real simple. Always a strong choice for pretty much any build. Ardling is a cool new addition via OneD&D, a creature with ancestries from the planes of good. They can fly as a bonus action, but fall if that was all that was keeping them aloft. Still nice to have. You get some spells, and you can be an animal person like the Egyptian pyramid doodles. Seems a lot more like the radiant counterpart of tieflings. No offense to Aasimars, they're special in a different way. The Dragonborn has dark vision, and a decent breath weapon that has uses equal to your proficiency bonus, and additional damage your total level contributes to. It's better than it was at the start of 5e, that's for darn sure. The dwarves are really cool. I love stone cunning, granting you tremor sense. It can be useful in so many ways, and adds a very unique piece to your hardy tool belt. Elves are about what I expected. There isn't really much I've noticed in regards to change here, but it looks good, and it'll be easier to add new sub-elf origins in, as there's not as much to consider now that backgrounds have ability scores and such in this version of the game. Halflings got a little less leeway with their mobility, but I don't think that breaks them in any fashion. They can't end their turn in a creature's space only one size larger, but they can still move through them to get wherever else they're going. I like the sub-origin idea behind halflings from 5e, but maybe they'll incorporate that later. We'll have to see. I'm loving the half-orc's abilities. A dash bonus action that gives you temp HP, with charges tied to our proficiency bonus. That's pretty incredible, not gonna lie to you. And of course our relentless endurance, the good old last stand that lets us stand at 1 HP if we should go down to 0 once per long rest. Very impactful abilities. This would make an absolutely incredible barbarian. I'm sure that's what they had in mind, but I have to admit, I'm very into this entry. The current Fiendish Legacy classification for the Tiefling origin is pretty nice. Less specific for all the infernal origins we got from D&D 5e, but to include the Abyss and Gehenna in that mix was a desirable note from me. Representation of the various ancestries a Tiefling might be host to as opposed to just the Hells. I'll quickly kind of run over backgrounds. Now, I have mixed feelings about backgrounds going in, but more for the certain choices that they hand to you. Whereas in D&D 5e, if a background gave me a language, it's perhaps one that was chosen for the background. But typically I get to choose one. I won't miss it too dearly, but I hope that some DMs will be lenient about letting their players choose the language they gain from their background, if that would be more suitable for their character. But that's a minor detail, however. Backgrounds seem to have a little more relevancy, because of how they dictate the ability score bonus that you gain. Personally, I feel like allowing your PC to choose where those extra stat points go is a good way to solidify what your character is really made of. However, doing it this way does give that background more relevance. What good is an entertainer with 8 charisma? It makes somewhat logical sense. Perhaps due to impulse, I'm driven to break these rules. I feel it might jam the creative process of character creation a smidge. But then again, an Outlander isn't always a criminal exile. They could be a former street kid from a harsh city, such as Baldur's Gate, to wander the lands, and so, a simple title doesn't need to impose itself completely over your process. These abilities come with feats that further enhance your character in some fashion, which can further impact your choice of background. In 5e, I'll admit, background is not much of a consideration other than influence of my character's action and personality. I won't cover them in great detail due to the vast number of combinations that could prove useful, but Gladiator gives you the Savage attack feat and some strength and charisma, so your attacks can be a little more consistent, and perhaps quite flashy as well. Farmer gives you a boost in Constitution and Wisdom, as well as animal handling and nature checks. You get the Tough feat as well, which can be good if your role is to endure the worst of the road ahead. Now we'll talk a little bit about the classes. Fighter seems reasonably balanced. More functionality with new weapon properties, and an action surge that means you can't cast an additional fireball that turn if you've multiclassed as a wizard. It makes me sad, but for the wrong reasons perhaps. If you remember that tidbit about weapon mastery properties from earlier, Fighter can replace them with more desirable ones with the weapons they currently wield. An interesting way to rebalance fighters. I don't know what that will mean for a potential Battlemaster archetype, but that might help make it into something that's different but for good reasons. Maneuvers are the 5e Battlemaster archetype's main selling point, and if we can do stuff like that with our weapons as is, perhaps something like that is still easily incorporated, all things considered. Either way, it's food for thought. Sorcerer's meta magics got toned down a little bit, with Twin Spell letting you use the next blast with sorcery points rather than a spell slot. The spell has to be between levels 1 to 5. I guess that limit's fair, but I'll miss what it used to be. However, that's nothing against the meta magic reworks. They gain innate spells that they always have, and so far everything else is what I expected. Bard has reverted from a lot of changes recently made to OneDnD. However, the duration of Bardic Inspiration is 1 hour, not 10 minutes, which is really decent for the purpose. If I'm not mistaken, they can use a spell slot to use Bardic Inspiration once they run out of charges. A nice touch if it's needed. I hope they keep the current classification of spells. Should they choose to, you adopt one of the 3 spell lists: Divine, Arcane, and Primal. At level 10 you get access to all 3, which means I can steal spells from absolutely everyone whenever. Not just at level 10, or lower levels as a lower bard. The new College of Dance is really cool, being able to hit harder and use your dance to mess with your enemies. It's more combat focused from what I was imagining, but in a good way. Cleric now gets a subclass at level 3, changing things up a little bit, but they all get heavy armor proficiency, so that's not a bad deal. Channel Divinity can heal or hinder, which is a nice touch as well. I feel like the Cleric can deal more damage, still heal really well, if not better, and ultimately has improved to create a solid class with a little less paperwork to start with. 5e Clerics, well, you choose your domain, which holds a lot for you right then and there. It's really not that big a deal, but as a new player, you have time to think about it a little bit. I'm pretty happy with the D&D Cleric. They have a solid-ish take on Druid, making the wild shape more influential and also being able to summon a companion as well. There's more damage with elemental spells, and our wild shape does more damage as we level up. I don't play a lot of druids, but ultimately it seems fairly solid. Monk got some solid buffs. Key abilities are more influential, but Flurry of Blows is unchanged from the seams of it. I don't see a reason to mess with it anyway, so that's fine. Martial Arts makes your fists a d6 to start off with. That's really nice to have for your 2 extra attacks from Flurry of Blows as a bonus action on your turn. They have a similar toolkit, but their more powerful abilities seem a little better for your average day of adventuring. I could talk about all these classes at length, I really could, but I feel like I've given you more than a taste of what lies within the playtest material for the classes I did not mention. Some of this may be reverted or changed as well, and so I hope these examples have given you some insight as to how things are coming along. Now we'll talk about spell descriptions. The first spell that caught my eye was Prayer of Healing. This is an outrageously good spell from the third playtest PDF that I hope dearly sticks around. It's 2d8 HP regained, targets could be a total equal to your ability modifier, and they gain the benefits of a short rest, which, as far as I'm concerned, allows them to use their hit dice to restore even more HP. And for 5e versions of Warlocks, that's all your spell slots back. I am aware at the time of writing this up that they may revert to the 2014 version of Spellcasters, and so that Warlock tidbit might still be relevant. It all depends. I really like how resistance is reaction. That's just a hell of a cantrip now. That's some early game action economy right there. Spiritual weapon seems pretty good. The small detail is that in 5e, this spell would only scale every 2 levels above second. Now, it's every level. Just makes life easier and the spell as influential as possible, whatever level you cast it at. Blinding Smite, and most of the other smites. Masterpiece, absolute masterpiece. You don't have to worry about concentration. You just have to hit with an attack action and cast the spell as a bonus action immediately after to do a bunch of damage and push them back, or frighten them, or blind them if they fail a save. Searing Smite has concentration for the burn, but that's its own gimmick. If spells like this with a paladin mean less focus on constitution, we may see more damage-based paladins in the future. That and paladins in general don't have to worry about potentially failing that save in a system where a nat 1 means a certain failure, although it probably still would honestly. Either way, I love it. Find Familiar is described well, works pretty much the same as it did before with perhaps less punishment for using an action to see what it sees and hears what it hears. I'm not sure if you're still blinded or deafened, only sensing what your familiar does until the end of the effect. It doesn't say that it does, so I guess you have another pair of eyes and ears until I'm corrected. Find Steed, it's a lot to take in. I'm a big fan, and it seems to give a lot more usefulness to the spell that I feel is a good fit. They have an ability depending on their creature type that can aid you in various situations. Spare the Dying is a bit more useful, which I like to see. It could potentially put someone back in the game, if only for a moment. There's really a lot to consider. I think there's 7 total playtest files now, and there's been enough to update myself on for sure. What I can say is that OneD&D is looking like a lot of fun. I'm eager to get into a playtest, and should I manage to assemble an adventuring team for it, I'll be hasty in posting my results. But we'll call it at that for now. I think I'd still prefer to do things with D&D 5e. As far as the new version has come, there's some really solid concepts that make me excited for what the final product shall be. There are some setbacks, but as long as we can establish and maintain a solid connection and understanding of the team and the game's development, we'll be able to see this through as a good addition to the game. But for now, I'm going to take a moment for myself. There's a lot to read through, and not enough time for me to cover it all. If there's anything that I got wrong or that I didn't mention in this video that you'd like to hear me talk about, leave a comment on your way to the subscribe button and I'll see about making that happen very soon. I might cover the Bastions and Cantrips playtest release in the future. Until next time, if the sky is gray and the breeze is gentle, a quiet palace shall be nearby.